They say there are ways to die that history remembers, and ways to die that history tries to bury so deeply that even the earth trembles at the memory, and among the lost punishments of the ancient world, there existed a ritual so strange, so cruel, and so fearfully whispered, that the kingdoms which practiced it tried to erase every trace of it from their chronicles. It was the execution through hair, a death designed not only to end a life, but to erase identity itself, a ritual born in the borderlands of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the forgotten edges of the Near East, where the laws of kings mixed with the superstitions of shepherds, and where a woman's hair was believed to hold spirit, destiny, pride, shame, lineage, and the sum of her worth. For centuries, travelers wrote half-terrified, half-fascinated accounts of villages where a woman's hair was treated as something sacred and dangerous, where beauty was both admired and feared, and where the wrong rumor whispered at dusk could turn her most cherished feature into the instrument of her execution. In these lands, women accused of betrayal, witchcraft, adultery, or any offense that touched the brittle pride of powerful men were seized. Often at night, when silence made every footstep sound like a warning, neighbors closed their doors, pretending not to hear the cries, because to intervene meant joining her fate. The condemned woman was dragged into a courtyard surrounded by oil lamps whose flames twisted in the wind like flickering witnesses. Her hair, carefully braided by the hands of mothers and grandmothers, scented with oils saved for weddings and sacred festivals, became a rope in the hands of those who now approached her not as protectors but as executioners. The men who carried out this ritual were sometimes priests, sometimes elders, sometimes husbands or fathers who believed themselves bound by honor or cursed by duty. They approached her with the solemnity of a burial procession, yet their silence carried the weight of cruelty disguised as law. The woman was forced to her knees or pressed to the ground, her hands tied so tightly behind her back that her fingers numbed. Her hair was unbraided, slowly, deliberately, strand by strand, in a twisted parody of bridal preparation. Her tears appeared before her voice did, but she did not beg, because begging would change nothing. In the oldest form of the ritual, her hair was divided into thick strands, pulled taut until her scalp throbbed and her vision blurred. Then each section was wrapped around a pole or beam and twisted methodically while the village watched in breathless silence. The tightening of the strands dragged her head back inch by inch until her jaw opened in a soundless cry. When the twisting reached its limit, the executioner gave one violent jerk. Sometimes the scalp tore away at once, plunging her into shock. Sometimes the hair ripped out in clumps, tearing flesh with it. Sometimes she remained conscious long enough to feel warm blood run down her face, mixing with dust and tears. A Persian chronicler once recorded an even harsher version where the woman was tied by her hair to a horse's saddle and the rider walked slowly, letting each step tear at her scalp until the skin peeled away like cloth from a wound. And the chronicler wrote that she did not scream because the pain swallowed her voice long before her body collapsed. Death was rarely immediate. Some women bled until their hearts surrendered, some collapsed into shock, some suffocated when their strength failed. But the purpose of the ritual was not merely to kill. It was to annihilate. Communities believed a woman's hair held her spirit, her memory, her connection to the living world. Cutting it was humiliation, burning it was purification, tearing it from her skull was erasure. Her death was not just punishment, it was a message carved into the minds of every daughter who watched from the shadows. Yet the ritual survived for generations, not because kings recorded it, but because victims refused to let it fade from memory. Their stories lived in whispers, in the trembling voice of a granddaughter describing a warning her grandmother had once spoken, in the final breath of elders who confessed what they had seen with trembling shame. Travelers wrote of women wandering with scarred or shaved heads, unable to rejoin their families because their missing hair marked them for life as cursed or impure. In ruins of forgotten forts, archaeologists later found carvings of figures with long strands pulled around wooden stakes, grim remnants of a ritual no one wanted to admit had ever existed. And beneath all these fragments lies a truth darker than the ritual itself. Not all women submitted in silence. Some cursed their executioners with their last breath. Some stared directly into the eyes of the man holding the rope and refused to bow their head. Some fought so fiercely that their names were spoken in fear for generations. And though their defiance did not save their lives, it carved their existence into the bones of history. This is the story of that ritual, a death almost erased from memory, yet still lingering at the edges of our shared past. A reminder that cruelty does not always come from swords or fire, and that sometimes the thing meant to embody a woman's beauty becomes the tool that ends her life. Sometimes death arrives not by blade or rope, but by the strand. The ritual did not end with death, because in those old kingdoms, punishment was never about the body alone. It was about memory, fear, and the control of those who survived. When a woman died through the tearing of her hair, the community did not disperse as they would after an ordinary execution. Instead, they remained gathered in a solemn circle as her body lay slumped where the final shock had taken her life. Her hair, or what little remained of it, clung to the pole or branch or saddle like some torn banner fluttering in the wind. The elders believed that what happened after her death mattered even more than what happened before it. They believed that her spirit, stripped of its earthly crown, would try to return in fury, and so the second part of the ritual began, a series of gestures and chants meant to prevent her from haunting those who condemned her. For hours, the executioners walked around her body, sprinkling ashes, salt, and powdered clay on the ground, because they believed a spirit without hair could not cross a purified circle. But the truth beneath these actions was simpler. They feared her. They feared the look in her eyes just before she collapsed. They feared the silence that followed the tearing and the way her blood soaked into the earth as if claiming it. They feared that what they had done could not be justified even by the harsh laws they claimed to obey. The men who carried out these rituals often pretended to be unmoved, yet their hands shook when they lifted her body. They avoided her eyes even when they were closed, as if the eyelids might rise again in accusation. The women of the village watched from the edges of the circle, their faces pale, their breaths shallow, and each one silently measuring how easily their own lives could be torn from them. For the ritual was never just a punishment, it was a warning. A reminder that their safety depended not on truth or justice, but on the shifting moods of powerful men. In some regions, the body of the executed woman was buried outside the village, far from consecrated ground. Her spirit was believed to wander restlessly, searching for the hair taken from her. In other places, the executioners burned the severed hair, believing that its smoke would prevent her soul from returning to reclaim it. Sometimes the ashes were scattered into rivers where the current would carry them away, ensuring that no trace remained. But even when the ritual was complete, even when the smoke faded and the villagers retreated to their homes, the memory of what they had witnessed stayed with them. No matter how many times the elders insisted that justice had been carried out, no matter how often priests declared that her death restored purity, no matter how firmly the law insisted that her fate was deserved, the sight of the ritual lingered in their minds, twisting like a storm cloud refusing to dissolve. It was said that when the ritual was performed too often, the village fell into misfortune. Crops failed, livestock sickened, children woke screaming in the night, claiming they felt fingers brushing through their hair. Superstition grew like mold in the air, and families whispered that the spirits of the executed women moved through the fields searching for vengeance. Whether these tales came from guilty conscience or ancient fear, no one could say. But in remote places, where the wind carried the cries of wolves across the hills, people swore they heard something more, something human, something mourning and furious at once. Not all villagers carried out the ritual willingly. In some regions, a king or clan leader commanded it, and the community obeyed because defiance meant sharing the woman's fate. There were stories of elders forced to participate, though they whispered apologies as they bound a victim's wrists. There were midwives who prepared herbs for the ritual, not because they believed in it, but because refusing meant death. And there were children who watched from behind their mother's skirts, their eyes wide, trying to understand why beauty had become punishment. Over time, word of these rituals reached travelers who brought the stories across mountains and deserts. Some dismissed them as exaggerations, others treated them as dark warnings about the cruelty that existed beyond their homelands. But a few, especially scholars, realized that these punishments revealed something deeper than brutality. They exposed how societies feared the power of women, power not in the physical sense, but in the symbolic one. A woman's hair represented lineage, fertility, and the continuity of family. To destroy it was to destroy her identity. To execute her through it was to turn that identity into her undoing. The ritual began to fade as empires rose and fell. New laws replaced old traditions, and the younger generation dared to question the justice of their ancestors. But the stories endured. They were carried into new eras through the songs of shepherds, through the fearful whispers of brides, through the confessions of dying elders who remembered what their fathers had forced them to witness. In certain villages, the ruins of an old execution post still stood leaning against the wind, rotting from age. Children avoided it during games. Elders looked away when passing it. Some said the earth around it never fully healed. The grass grew patchy, the soil remained dark, and any animal that lingered there too long became uneasy. In time, the ritual became a legend, but legends do not die. They warp, reshape, and return. And as centuries passed, scholars uncovered fragments of ancient legal codes mentioning punishments linked to hair tearing. Archaeologists found burial sites with skulls bearing scars that matched the violent removal of scalp or hair. The evidence was rare but chilling. enough to remind the world that the ritual was not myth alone. It had lived, it had killed. But the story of the execution through hair does not belong solely to the past. Its shadow appears in modern history in cultures where women's hair is still controlled, restricted, or used as punishment. In places where shaving a woman's head is used not to execute, but to shame. In societies where a strand still symbolizes purity and rebellion. The echoes of the ritual remain in the collective memory of humanity, resurfacing whenever power seeks to control a woman's identity. And those centuries have passed, though kings and elders have turned to dust, though the poles and saddles and execution stakes have rotted away, one question remains lingering like a whisper through time. What kind of fear compels a society to invent a death that turns beauty into pain, identity into punishment, and hair into the weapon that takes a life? The answer hides not in the ritual itself, but in the men who created it. Those who ruled through terror understood that the greatest cruelty is not to kill a woman but to make her death a message that resounded through daughters and granddaughters through generations, taught to fear the very body they inherited. This is why the ritual survived as long as it did. Not because it was necessary, but because fear is a legacy more enduring than law. And even now, standing centuries away from the world that birthed this punishment, we can still feel the chill it left behind. For the past does not die, it clings to us like strands of hair caught in the wind. And the forgotten ritual, though buried in silence, continues to whisper its warnings to anyone willing to listen. They tried to erase the ritual from memory, but memory has teeth and it does not release what it once tasted. Even when kingdoms outlawed the execution through hair, even when new rulers declared it barbaric, even when priests insisted that no such cruelty had ever existed, the truth refused to die. It clung to the whispers of the old, it lurked in the stories told beside dying hearth. Fires it hid in the scars left behind on the skulls of the forgotten. For the ritual had not only killed women, it had shaped the souls of those who watched. Trauma has a way of surviving longer than flesh. In the villages where the punishment once ruled, the aftermath lingered for generations. The daughters of the women who witnessed the executions grew up with hands that trembled when they combed their own hair. Mothers tied their daughters' braids to tight, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, a fear that history might reach across the centuries and tighten its grip once more. Children were taught never to let their hair drag on the ground, never to let anyone touch it, never to braid it too elaborately, because beauty in places touched by the ritual was seen not as blessing but as danger. A woman whose hair drew admiration risked catching the wrong man's attention, and in cultures where beauty was feared, desire became a sentence. There were villages where brides were required to shave their heads before marriage, so that no husband would ever mistake hair for pride. There were families who cut the hair of newborn daughters while murmuring prayers, begging the ancestors to keep them safe from the fate of their foremothers. The ritual had ended, but its shadow had not. It prowled beside every mother, every daughter, every sister, a silent ghost, reminding them that their worth had once been measured, not by their voice or their mind, but by the strands growing from their scalp. Travelers who returned to the regions where the ritual had occurred noticed strange customs. Women walked with scarves even when there was no sun. They refused to lower their heads when entering rooms because revealing the top of the skull felt like an invitation to danger. Some men still carried knives shaped specifically for cutting rope or hair, claiming it was merely a tool. But the shape of the blade, the curve of the edge, the sharpness honed with obsessive precision betrayed the truth. Old habits survived long after the deaths that created them. The stories of the executed women began to blend into legend as centuries passed. In one village they spoke of a woman whose hair was so long it brushed the earth when she walked, and whose spirit rose after her death to haunt the fields. They said she appeared in the mist at dawn, her hair floating behind her like smoke, searching for the scalp that had been torn from her body. In another tale, a traveler claimed to hear a woman crying at night, though the village had no women left after a famine. The locals refused to speak of it, insisting that the ghosts of the hair-taken women did not like their grief to be named. Historians much later would dismiss these stories as superstition, but superstition is often truth wearing a mask. In these tales, the executed women survived as warnings, as symbols, as echoes of a cruelty that refused to stay buried. Some communities went so far as to forbid singing while combing hair, certain that melodies might summon the spirits of those whose hair had been ripped from them. Others refused to plant certain flowers, believing the roots resembled strands torn from flesh. Fear carved its signature into culture-shaping rituals that outlasted the kings who first commanded the punishment. But every shadow eventually meets resistance. As new societies emerged, daughters began asking questions their mothers could not answer. Why had the ritual existed? Why had men feared women enough to invent such a death? Why had beauty been turned into a weapon against those who carried it? These questions spread quietly, then loudly, and at last across generations, until the silence broke. Scholars wrote of the ritual, documenting scraps of evidence with growing horror. Anthropologists compared it to similar punishments in other cultures. Feminist historians uncovered accounts where women spoke of the ritual not as punishment, but as terror meant to prevent rebellion. And slowly the world began to understand that the ritual was not merely cruelty, it was control. Because to kill a woman through her hair was to destroy the symbol men feared most: her identity, her lineage, her future. It was the execution of possibility itself. And in societies where women were seen as the bearers of honor or shame, the ritual became the ultimate erasure. A woman executed through hair could not be mourned, could not be remembered, could not be buried with ceremony. She became nothing, and that was the point. But nothing stays nothing forever. Eventually the stories of victims rose from the cracks of history, refusing to stay silent. A rare fragment of a court record described a woman who refused to kneel even as her hair was tied to the beam. She stared at her executioner with such intensity that he dropped the rope. They replaced him with another. He too faltered. The third man carried out the act, but not before she said words so quiet they were almost lost. "They cannot take what I am." Later generations interpreted this as prophecy. They believed the ritual died because women like her refused to surrender their identity even as it was torn from them. Other whispered accounts spoke of a woman whose execution was halted when a sudden storm ripped the poles from the ground. The watchers fled in terror, believing the spirits of past victims had risen to protect her. Whether the story was true mattered less than the lesson it carried. Resistance was possible. Fate could be broken. As the world changed, the ritual became a relic of shame. Museums eventually displayed tools linked to it, though curators spoke cautiously, ashamed to admit what ancestors had done. Scholars debated its origins, but the truth remained the same. The ritual was a creation of fear and patriarchy, a punishment, designed to strip women of body identity and history in a single violent moment. And yet the legacy of the ritual remains visible even today. In places where shaving a woman's head is still used as humiliation. In cultures where hair is policed, controlled, hidden, forced into modest shapes. In societies where losing hair becomes a metaphor for losing value. We like to imagine that we have moved beyond such cruelty, but the echoes of the past linger in modern attitudes. And when we see a woman shave her head in revolt, when we see hair fall to the floor as a symbol of freedom or grief, we witness a reclamation of what was once used to destroy. The ritual through hair is no longer practiced, but the ghosts of the women killed by it remain. They linger in stories, songs, ruined superstitions. They linger in every culture that once believed a woman's body belonged to society more than to herself. They linger because injustice never buries itself. It demands reckoning, and so as history moves forward, their memory rises, not as horror alone, but as warning. Beauty should never be weaponized. Identity should never be punishable. A strand of hair should never decide between life and death. The ritual stands as a reminder of how easily societies can turn symbols into shackles, how easily power can twist beauty into pain, how quickly the fragile notions of honor can ignite cruelty. But in telling their story, telling it fully, telling it without flinching, we restore what was taken from them. We give back the dignity that the ritual tried to erase. We speak for those whose voices were pulled from their scalps along with their hair. And in doing so, we ensure that their fate no longer hides in the shadows but stands exposed in the light where it can never be repeated. This is the end of their story. But it is also the beginning of our responsibility to remember, to understand, and to make certain that the forgotten ritual stays forgotten forever.